Hi, I'm Sassy Raja.
I'm Cheyenne Didi.
And I'm Jordan Avellino.
And this is your 50s Crash Course. The 50s were a time when the individual prospered. However, the individualistic idea didn't begin its reign in the 50s. In fact, it began way back in the 1920s.
The 1920s began in New York City, in the United States of America. It was a time where the progressives and the conservatives fought against each other to win the battle of society. The progressives were progressing far ahead. They had flappers, they had speakeasies, they had radio, and they had so much more. But with the impending Great Depression, they could not hold their ground, and the conservatives won out the battle of the 1920s.
Oh, hi, I didn't see you there. In the 1930s, the progressives tried once again to gain societal control, but once the Dust Bowl came a-knocking, the progressives were shocking. The progressives weren't able to create new ideas because the stock market crashed, the Great Depression arose. The conservatives took over getting the country back into its normal routine. It wasn't until World War II that the progressives began to shine once more.
The 40s.
And now, a poem by Sassy Raja.
The 1950s, a time when the progressives came to shine. The conservatives favored their comfort. They wore it all over their dumb shirts. The new ideas slapped them in the face, which ruined their entire base. With the baby boom and suburbs, the conformists thought they could kick them to the curb. But consumerism and cars played in the game and eventually led the progressives to fame.
Presley was a staple of the 1950s. He performed songs and wore clothes derived from African American culture. Not only was he one of the biggest staples of the 1950s, but he influenced the baby boomer generation greatly. When they heard his music, they started to wear different clothes that showed more skin, and they began to dance very provocatively. This is how the 1950s became known as one of the most progressive generations of all time.
How did Elvis's role during the 50s lead into the civil rights movement?
Elvis played a key role in racial integration. By playing music that was labeled as African American, he was able to blur the lines between the blacks and whites. He drove away from how the typical white person acted and became his own person. The teenagers of this time really looked up to him and were able to acknowledge the African Americans, which eventually began the start of the civil rights movement.
The civil rights movement was a national effort made by black people and their supporters in the 1950s and 60s to eliminate segregation and gain equal rights, demonstrated by Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat on the bus for a white person, and Martin Luther King Jr., who gave his I Have a Dream speech. The civil rights movement allowed blacks and whites to start being viewed as equal. With this movement, the progressives had changed history forever.
The individualistic idea was able to prosper in the 1950s. The progressives were able to hold a tight grip on society, and after the 1950s, the individual was a thing of the normal. This has been your 1950s Crash Course with Jordan Avellino, Cheyenne Bibi.
And Sassy Raja.
In New York City, in the United States of America, it was a time.
Okay, wait, no, you gotta sit like, you know how people
okay.
interviews. This hurts. Okay. Hold on. Can I see the paper? I'm too tall for this. Okay, hold on.
Maybe we should have gotten Jordan. Whatever. We'll just.
Okay, hurry up.
Well, it's been filming this whole time.
Is that cool? Alright.
The United States of America. It was a time when the progressives and the liberals fought against each other to see where the progressives and the liberals fought against each other to win the battle